Shalom. Let's talk about the tribe of Dan. As the seventh son of Jacob, Dan was tasked with a great responsibility, as his name stems from the root word for justice. His tribal symbol is depicted as either a scale of justice or a snake. As it is written, Dan shall seek justice for his people, as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the road, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider is thrown backwards. So, if there was ever a more perfect symbol for our tribe, it is that of Dan, the serpent. This tribe captures a mystery that no other tribe has. Dan acts like the serpent, keeping out of sight, in the shadows, tend to avoid commitment with others, and it's hard for them to be pressured, which can be good, and at the same time, it can be bad. They're very hard-headed, and most of the time, they only see their ways as the only way. Dan represents a new force in the family of Israel. He was the first in-between child. Dan came out of Rachel's growing desperation of becoming a mother. He was that almost child of Rachel, from who he inherits many of his strongest and most controversial traits. So, the Danites define themselves as bitter-souled people, and the same language was compared to Hannah as well as Rachel. They were both bitter-souled because they were both barren, and not having a child is to be alone, especially in the ancient world. Dan had the same insecurities and passion of Rachel. He pretty much remains silent to us over his lifetime. It is only in Jacob's blessing to this mysterious son that we are first exposed to the greatness of what this tribe could be. First, leadership, power, danger, and glory are the characteristics of these tribes. Genesis 49:16 through 17. Dan shall govern his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the road, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that his rider is thrown backwards. I wait for your deliverance, O Lord. So, reading Genesis 49, these words are very strange and poetic. The first few lines are clear enough. It's the definition of Dan's name. Rachel named him in thanksgiving of being judged in favor by Yahweh. He has judged me. Jacob, on the other hand, had a different definition for his name and gave the boy the blessing of justice and that he would be the perfect candidate for the Jewish leader, the Shaphat. A Shaphat was not your regular judge. The Shaphatim were the leader in between the period of Joshua administration and that era of kings. They ruled for hundreds of years. These were charismatic men and women who rise up to lead Israel. Regardless of tribe, like Moses, Deborah, they were accepted by Israel as political, military, and at times spiritual leaders. Samson the Danite stood as the perfect leader for this troubled age where men did what was right in their own eyes. It was Samson that Jacob was talking about in his blessing to Dan. So we all know the story of Samson. Samson was infamous for his devastating and quick strikes against the Philistine. He was like a dangerous viper hiding in the grass, waiting to strike against the heels standing in their way, and nobody was expecting anything. He destroyed bodies much larger than he, biting the horse's heels so that the rider is thrown backwards, and the Gazan temple came toppling down, killing everyone and himself in the process. He worked alone, just like the state, and as a separate tribe of Israel. Samson would have been your perfect leader. Samson was strong, had a fierce strength, and was also very clever, had a great bravery, and did not fear all the good qualities of a great leader. But what happened? Let's go ahead and start from the beginning. Samson Baron's mother was a sign of loneliness as well. She was visited by an angel of the Lord. She was informed that she would conceive and bear a son. He was set apart from the womb. Now, be careful, the angel tells her, not to drink wine or other intoxicants or to eat anything unclean, for you are going to conceive and bear a son. Let no razor touch his head, for the boy is to be at the service of Yahweh from the womb on. Judges 13:4-5. So let's talk about who the Nazarites were. Nazarites were Israelites that would take a vow to dedicate their life to Yahweh, and they were under strict vows to abstain from alcohol, let their hair grow, and would not touch dead bodies. Samson, though, made no such personal decision. His isolation was a lifelong demand from the divine, even before his conception. And why? In Jacob's blessing to Dan, he indicates that Dan will unify the nation under his leadership. He will defeat his enemies like the swift and deadly serpent, further connecting this tribe with the promise of ultimate leadership and greatness. So, where was Samson failing? In other words, Dan. Samson usually was described in Jewish literature as one with large, searching eyes. Samson was a leader that represented the people of its time. Everyone, and I mean everyone, did what was right in their eyes, and he also was very responsive to his surrounding. I desired that one, and she's the right one in my eyes. While he was indeed a lone wolf, he also responded to everything without thinking. He just acted. Jacob hoped that Dan would channel those intense passion to save Israel from their enemies. Dan had a very responsive personalities, and people with responsive personalities are people that are very aware of their surroundings. They are very alert, yet this level of responsiveness and passion came with danger. Such a man would have a grand vision, but has to be able to control his eyes. If not, his personal loss can betray his original intentions. Samson's separation from the world was supposed to protect him, but it was not enough. It was not enough to prevent his wandering eyes from drifting him far away from Yahweh's original plan. Samson was Dan, a strong leader with big weakness. After Samson, the tribe of Dan went back into the dark shadows to be forgotten again. The tribe of Dan surfaced time and time again in curious partnership with Judah. Twice, this tribe was joined together in building Yahweh's home, both in the desert and Solomon's temple. Also, Samson was conceived from the union of these two tribes, Manoah of Dan and his wife from Judah. Also, Judah and Dan were both large tribes, even though Dan started as one of the smallest tribes with only one son. Moses called Dan a lion's cub in a clear echo of Jacob's blessing to Judah. These two tribes were joined together again and again to show that no tribe is without salvation. Thus majestic Judah was constantly paired with Dan. Says the Master of the universe, let us join them together, both that he, Dan, not be ashamed, and that he, Judah, not be arrogant, since the most grand and the lowliest are equal before the Lord. This equality before the Lord is a beautiful statement of Yahweh's unique connection to the lowly and disposed. He must choose a Messiah to gather all the lost children of Israel. But before David can rule, this role ultimately belonged to the gatherer, Joseph, whose name captured the quality of binding together individuals into a shared vision. And yet, Joseph was not the only gatherer among the brothers. Dan, his older brother, filled this role as well. During Israel's journey in the desert, Dan's position was on the back. They were very large and not easily managed tribe, therefore they traveled last. This shows their strength and their weakness at the same time. On one hand, they were the first line of defense in the case of a rear attack. This pointed out their strength and courage. As we saw with Samson, this tribe of origin were almost impossible to defeat. Yet, trailing in the back, always feeling bitter soul and least beloved. Let's go ahead and understand Dan's role as a gatherer. We would have to revisit the serpent from the very beginning of Genesis. The serpent's reputation was known as a sly seducer, and we can all agree. But we can still find redeemable qualities. The serpent knew what it was like to eat the dust, and perhaps that was a necessary trait for a gatherer, for their assignment was to keep people from falling too far behind, encouraging people to remain within the group. I am with you, brother. I am with you, brother, in your loneliness, and yet I'm still part of this nation, and you should be too. The gatherer absorbed everything and left no one behind. Dan is a serpent on the path, perhaps not the most glorified tribe, but the one who most easily relate to others that are also left behind. The role of a gatherer was a lonely one. They did not share the easy friendship of the group and instead were left behind. Samson represents Dan. He was the perfect example of what a Danite basic nature is. He was fierce, but very lonely. No one had his back, whether in battles or politics, and it seems like Samson did not mind at all. He actually enjoyed this loneliness, and this is where he failed as a leader. As part of Israel, you have to be part of the community. We are one body, and even though we're all different, we have to work together. This is why Samson was not successful in bringing Israel together. He drifted along the margins once again, suffering a horrible fate at the hands of his enemies. If he would have not been that hard-headed and would have listened to others' advice, maybe his future situation would have been different. Time and time again, the prophets compare men's attraction to idolatry, to lusting after foreign women. For Dan, pull towards idolatry was caused by the feeling of disconnect between man and his creator. It was Dan's land that took him to separate himself from Israel and from Yahweh. During the time of Judges, there was no security, no tranquility among the ranks of Israel, no unified vision embodied by a central ruler, and Dan felt this in a very personal level. This tribe was the only tribe that was not happy with the land that Yahweh gave them and decided to search for another land. And they decided to go as far away from Israel as possible in the city of Laish. The Danites felt isolated, and they also reflected their distance in a very physical plane. They were very bitter with what Yahweh gave them, the land he gave them. And let's go ahead and say all the sons of Rachel had this pull towards discerning the future. Joseph commanded his servant to accuse his brothers from stealing his divination cup. Micah from Ephraim had an items of divination. King Saul from Benjamin eventually gave his desire to know how would the battle with Philistine would go, and he would go and visit a diviner. The same journey for witchcraft was clearly visible in Dan. As Dan headed up north seeking lands, they stopped by a curious shrine housed by Micah and decided to take the shrine with them so they can set it up in their new cities, which later was adopted by Jeroboam and used as a worship place until all the tribes were exiled. Dan had tendencies of idolatry, and this also portrayed the tribe in a very negative light. The sinful Danites turned good into evil. This idea stretches as far as Christian legends, which identifies the Antichrist as a descendant of Dan. But of course, this is only a legend because we see that no tribe of Israel will be lost. All Israel will be saved. Dan's permanent loneliness were the roots of perhaps of their attraction to idolatry. Like Dan's semi-mother Rachel at the time of his birth, Dan's tribe did not find its place. They flitted alone on the side of things, contributing to Israel, but with very minimal effort, doing everything their way and not Yahweh's way. Even though that Samson destroyed the Philistine, it was not the way that Yahweh intended. Alas, the tragic ending of Samson. Dan's character represents Rachel's time when she was barren and unfulfilled, still distanced from the rest of the family. Her first son inherited the instincts to live dangerously. Rachel represents expectation. She represents dreams and aspirations. However, she remains forever expectant, forever awaiting fulfillment, both personally and symbolically. She is perhaps one of the most poignant expressions of the person who has everything and yet remains lacking. Even when Rachel's dreams were realized, it was not in her lifetime. The hope, the potential remain always suspended between what may have been and what might yet come to be. To Dan belongs raw power, and his self-reliance doesn't need anybody. But this is also a very dangerous weakness, and it's loneliness. There are people that prefer to remain apart from others, but Israel is one body. We all have to work together. We cannot be apart, for the body is not one member but many. And let us consider how we may encourage one another towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habits of doing, but encouraging one another as the days are approaching. Dan consistently goes back to their flaws. It's hard for them to let go of their weakness. Although he is part of the nation, it is hard to embrace the serpent. But include him we must. And the best way to achieve that is by celebrating the promise of his birthright. Let us believe that one day Dan will emerge as the leader that he was always meant to be. Shalom.